All right, everybody, so welcome back. So for this video, I'm going to show you guys Finspan. I'm going to talk about, stuff about this game, but I'm also going to show you guys how to play Finspan as well. So before I talk about what I think of Finspan, I'll show you guys how to play Finspan. All right, so here we go. First of all, I'm going to show you guys how to play Finspan. So here we go. So in Finspan, first let's talk about how you're going to score points in this game. So one of the ways you're going to score points in this game is at the end of the game, for each one of these eggs you have on your board, and for each one of these young fish you have on your board, for each one, that's 1 victory point. So right now, that's 3 victory points at the end of the game, currently. That's one of the ways you'll score points in this game. Another way you will score points in this game is for each school of fish that you have on your player board, that's six points. So that's a lot of points, and so you're gonna wanna try to get some school of fish for sure, because these can score you a lot of points. Also, another way you're going to score victory points is when you play a fish, they each give you a certain amount of victory points. So this Pacific White Skate gives you 3 points. This Crayola fish gives you 4 points. This Mandarin fish only gives you 1 point, and so on. So they're each going to give you a certain amount of points. That's another way you'll score points in this game. Some of these cards will have these yellow abilities on them as well. And so, for instance, let me find one. Let's see. Here we go. So this Leafy Sea Dragon has a game end. So this is only activated at the end of the game. But if you have a school of fish on this Leafy Sea Dragon at the end of the game, then you'll get an additional 3 victory points for this Leafy Sea Dragon, in addition to what it provides already, which is 2 victory points, for instance. And of course, that school of fish is also providing you victory points too, so that's nice, right? So some of these cards will have game end abilities as well. Now, with that said, we have an achievement board, and at the end of every week, which is basically a round, you're going to score victory points based on what that achievement for the week is. Now, for side A, it's always going to be the same achievement for each of the weeks, and the 4th week is always only for game end abilities, which it says it right here. But if you're playing with side B, it's going to be varied of what you could potentially need in order to score points. But for your first game, you would just play with side A anyways, probably. And so, if at the first week, for every egg or young you have, you'll score 1 victory point, okay? So I'd get 3 victory points for the first week. If this was my equation, 2 eggs and 1 young fish. Week 2, it scores you 2 points for every row of fish you have. So if I had a fish here, fish here, fish here, fish here, a fish here, and a fish here, that would be 2 rows completely full of fish, and I would score 4 victory points, for instance. And then week 3, for every school of fish you have, you're gonna get 2 points. So if I had a couple schools of fish, if I had 2 of them, that would be 4 points. So that's another way you'll score points in this game. Those are the main ways you'll score points in this game. So that's how you score points in Finspan. And you use this marker to indicate what round you are in. So in Finspan, what you're going to be doing is you're going to either be playing a fish or you're going to go on a dive, okay? Now, each one of these columns is a different dive site. So we have a blue dive site, okay? We have a purple dive site, and we have a green dive site, all right? So you can send one of your workers down one of these dive sites as an action, or you can play a fish as an action as well, okay? Now, the way you play a fish is going to be indicated at the top left side of the card. This is the cost to play said fish. That's what the cost will be. And in the beginning of the game, you're going to start with 2 of these types of cards that are this color here. And there's more than 2, so you'll be randomly getting 2 of these for each game, for each player. And you'll also get 3 of the cards from the draw pile of this color here, this darker blue color, okay? And this is your starting hand of 5 cards, okay? And let me get them right side up. So when you want to play a fish, one of the costs for playing a fish is just simply discarding one of the cards you have. So if I wanted to play this mandarin fish, which goes in the sunlight zone, so it tells you what zone it's supposed to go into, and this is the sunlight zone, this is the twilight zone, and then this zone here is the midnight zone. So it tells you what zone you can put your fish into. Okay, so this mandarin fish can go in the sunlight zone, and it would only cost me 1 fish to play it into my my sunlight zone. So if I wanted to play this mandarin fish, like maybe here for instance, I would just discard one of these fish from my hand, maybe this one from my hand, and it would go into a personal discard pile. All right, now because the cards are shaped like this, when you are forming your discard pile, you will put your discard pile basically like that. So you know the difference between your discard pile and what may be in your hand, because you're not always necessarily going to have these cards in your hand, right? So you're going to put them sideways when they're not in your hand, and your discard pile is going to be not sideways if it's your discard pile, okay? Now, what's cool is while you're discarding a fish into a personal discard pile to play some of your fish, what's really cool is there is an ability here, and you might get a card ability that has this, but basically what this means, this little icon here means, is when you get to activate this ability here, whether it's on a card or on this player board here, you can bring one of your fish back from your discard pile and put them back into your hand. So there's no dilemma of which fish I'm discarding, because if I wanted to play this fish later, this skate later, I could still do so even if I discarded it, because I could potentially get it back later. That's the general idea. But that's just one of the costs of playing a fish. Another cost to play a fish, so this pork fish, for instance, it requires you to discard an egg. You start the game with 2 eggs. So it's possible to play the pork fish on your first turn, because most likely you will have not discarded an egg yet. So I could discard this egg from my player board to play the pork fish as well, for instance. Okay? So that's another payment type. Then there's, let's see, let me find some other fish. Hold on. Then there's this giant manta ray, for instance. You'll notice it has this icon here. So first of all, to play it, I would first have to discard 2 cards from my hand, but then I would also have to discard, sorry, my voice is in and out. I would also have to discard a yun fish. Now you start the game off in the beginning of the game with a yun fish. So if I discarded this, I could also play this giant manta ray and discard 2 cards and this to play this, which is nice. Now it has a wind plate ability too, okay? And we'll get to that later. We'll get to understanding wind plate abilities and other abilities later. But for now, we're just talking about costs on fish, okay? So that's another type of cost that you could potentially pay to play a fish. Then we have this deep sea lizard fish here. And you'll notice it already has a yun fish as the cost to play it. But then this icon means, you'll see there's a bite out of this fish. It means consuming a fish. And so, if I wanted to play this fish, I would have to consume a fish as well as pay a yun to play it. Now, what's really cool is this fish can go into the midnight zone here. And you'll see this fish here is printed on the board. And so you can consume any fish, whether it's a fish you've played or a fish that's printed on the board. So for instance, if I discarded this young fish from my player board, for instance, you know, and let's just say that guy's not there now. If I could also, just for the second cost of this fish, I could play it here, and that would be enough. And anything that's on the board, so if this egg is here, you'll notice, anything that is on the board, when a fish consumes another fish, and there's an egg, or a young, or a school of fish on the card, you'll just put it on top of the new card. So you don't lose these tokens whatsoever if a fish is going to consume another fish, or just simply going on the board where a young fish might be, okay? Eggs always have to be on fish, okay? So we'll get to that later. But young fish could potentially not be on a fish. They could be on their own, but eggs will always be on a fish. But yes, that's another type of payment that you could potentially need to pay for in order to play it. And then there's one other type of payment you might come across. So this whale shark here, it has this icon here, which means a school of fish. So in order to play this whale shark, you would have to have a school of fish on your player board. And then if you did, you could pay it, okay, to play the whale shark. And that's kind of how that's going to work. So those are all the different types of payments that you could come across in order to play a fish. So that's how you play a fish. Let's explain some abilities next. So some of the fish that you're going to play will have when played abilities, okay? Some of them will even say all players. So when you do this, all players get to do this too. So if I was to play this whale shark, I could put an egg on every fish that is in my green dive zone. So if I had a bunch of fish in this column here, and I played this whale shark, I could put an egg on each one of the fish here. But, so let's use some examples here. So let's say I had this mandarin fish, all right? And I had an egg already on the mandarin fish. And I activated this whale shark, okay? And let's just say he was here, because he can go there, right? I could put an egg on every single one of these fish. Well, this fish already has an egg, so I couldn't put an egg here. This fish also has an egg, so I would not be able to put the egg there. But I could still put the egg on this whale shark because it doesn't have an egg yet. You're only allowed to have one egg on each fish, no more than one egg. So make note of that when you're going to activate an ability that lets you place eggs on fish for sure, because that could be a problem. So that's one of the potential possibilities that you could come across when activating an ability. Let's see. Ooh, this giant manta ray here, for instance, it lets you place out 3 young fish. And the cool thing about young fish is they can be even in a spot without another fish, right? And because young fish, the great thing about young fish is you can actually place young fish in the same spot as another young fish, unlike the eggs. So if I got this manta ray out and played it, okay, let's just say I played it here, and I was able to discard 2 cards, and I was able to pay this young fish to play it, and then discarded 2 cards to play it as well, and I could play the giant manta ray right there because I've paid its cost. Well, now I get to activate its ability. So that means I get to place out 3 young fish. That means I could place all 3 of the young fish into a spot, into the same spot. And what's really cool is once 3 young fish are in the same spot, they immediately become a school of fish. That is how you're going to get a school of fish. Now, later we will explain how there's other ways of getting that school of fish, as in how are you going to get these young fish normally to the same spot, to turn into a school of fish, right? We'll explain that momentarily, but yes, that's a potential possibility. Of course, here's another interesting theory with that card. Let's say I had a young fish here, and I had, actually, let's say I had 2 young fish here already, and I had, sorry if my voice is in and out. Sorry. There we go. That's better. So, let's say I had 2 fish there, 2 fish there, and I had a couple of fish here, right? For instance, okay? And then I just played the manta ray, and I'm just getting to activate its when played ability, right? I could, for instance, place out a young fish here, a young fish here, a young fish here, making each one of these into a school of fish. Potentially a very powerful animal if you play it at the right time. So that's how that's going to work. Now, when you have a school of fish, okay, so there's something to note when you have a school of fish. So when you have a school of fish already on the board, you are allowed to have an egg on the same spot as that school of fish, all right? You're also allowed to have a young fish with a school of fish, right? That's also allowed. But let me show you this. If I, for instance, had 3 young fish in the same spot as a school of fish, they stay like that. They do not become this red school of fish, because you're only allowed to have 1 school of fish on each card, on each fish, basically, in each area, right? So these would not be able to become a school of fish if you were putting all these young fish here. So that means that later on, maybe you could potentially move this school of fish out of the way if you make use of an ability that lets you do that, and we'll explain it momentarily, and you were able to move this school of fish out of the way, then these 3 young fish could then immediately become a school of fish. Another thing to note is if you have a school of fish in a couple of spots, let's say I had a school of fish here, and I had a school of fish here, a school of fish here, a school of fish here, right? And let's say that one's actually there. If I wanted to move this school of fish, it would be illegal. I wouldn't be able to, because you're not allowed to move this school into a fish into another spot with a school of fish. So this school of fish is trapped. That means these young fish would never be able to become a school until I spent a turn or an ability that moved this out of the way, and then spent another action and ability that let me move a fish to move this school out of the way, so that could become a school. So that's kind of the idea of how that's going to work. So that's the placement rules for schools of fish and for young fish and eggs. That's how that's going to work. So let me just fix the board again a bit. All right. So that's how that's going to work. So that's some of the potential when played abilities you could play the giant manta rays, right? So I explained the when played abilities a bit. So let me explain if activated. So this brown ability here, if activated, this one's even got all players on it. Let's say I had this fish here. We'll place this fish here for now. Actually, it has to go here because it's only in the twilight zone it can go. So let's place that fish there. All right, and let's place this fish here as well. Okay, and yeah, that egg's there. That's fine. And this is an egg here. And let's get just a couple other eggs for this next example. Maybe one there. And it's 2, 3 eggs. Yeah, maybe one more egg. Let's do one more egg. Okay, so let me explain the diving situation, because that's where these brown abilities will come into play, okay? So the second type of action that you can take is if activated. So when you play a fish, you're going to place your diver at this little line here to indicate that you used this, okay, to play a fish, all right? One of these to play a fish. You'll have 6 of these every round, okay? 4 rounds in the game, you'll have all 6 every round. But when you choose to dive and do what the dive does, what you're going to do is you're going to send your diver to a spot that you want to dive down to. Now, let's just start with this column here since I've got some fish in this column already. So what you're going to do when you decide to take a dive, and let's say we're diving down the green zone, like I said, what you're going to do is you're going to move down as if you were going down a column in Wingspan, but you're going to, on a row in Wingspan, but you're moving down a column in Finspan. So you're going to come down to a point where you get to activate if activated. So this ability here, it doesn't have a thing that says all players on it, okay? So let me see if we can just bring that a little closer and maybe zoom in even. Can we zoom in? There we go. So you'll notice this has a if activated, meaning you don't have to activate it, okay? Right? But if it had what this giant fish has, then even if you decide not to use it, your opponents will get to use it because it's an all players activated ability. And if activated does mean that you're going to pass by it. So in a sense, you're activating this too, even if you decide not to utilize it, okay? So if your diver comes across a card that has an if activated, you're activating it even if you're not taking advantage of the ability, okay? And if it's something that affects your opponents, and they get a benefit, even if you decide not to take the benefit, they're going to get this benefit anyways. So make note of that you're helping out your opponents even if you're not helping out yourself, okay? But first, let me zoom back out a little bit. So the first thing you're going to do on these columns is you're actually going to notice this icon here. It's got a fish on it, and it's got an icon that looks like an egg. A fish is hatching out of the egg, okay? So you're going to look and see if you have a fish in this zone. If you do not, then you do not get this benefit. And that would be the same for this one and this column. And we'll explain those columns in a moment. Okay? But what you're going to do is you're going to see if you have a fish. And if you do, then you get to hatch one of your eggs for this particular column. So that means I can hatch one of my eggs on one of my fish. Let's say I decide to activate this one. So now I've got a young fish on this glass head grenadier fish, okay? So I got to activate that, right? Then you're going to move your diver down the column, like I said. And then if you have a brown ability, and if activated ability, you're going to get to activate it, even if you don't want to utilize it or can't because you don't have anything to hatch for this one in particular. So let's say I do, though, because I do. So I'm going to hatch this fish, for instance, and I'm going to hatch this one as well because I get to do 2, right? That's cool, for instance. Okay, then you'll move down again. This Mandarin fish doesn't have an if activated, so we keep going. Then this zone also has that same icon with the fish and the egg. So you'll see if you have a fish in this column, in this segment here, which we do. So that means I get to activate this again, which means, hey, guess what? Guess what? Well, hold on. I'm going to put this whale shark here down too as well. So that means I get to draw a card. Sweet. Because that's what this icon means. When it's on this side of the card, it means I get to draw a card. So if this little icon here is on the left side, it means I have to discard a card. But if it's on this side of the card, it means I get to draw a card. But then everybody gets to as well because that's the ability. Everybody gets to as well. But first, I get to activate this and hatch another egg. So that's nice. So now I've got 4 young here, for instance. Okay, cool. All right, so then we'll go down to the next zone, right? Now, hold on, let me grab my guy here. So we already activated this to draw a card. So now we'll go here. Now, if I didn't have any fish in this column here, then I would not get to activate this ability, okay? Let's just say I do. Let's say I have this whale shark, okay? Well, this icon means I'm going to get to move a fish, all right? This is the main way you're going to move fish in this game is here, okay? So, hey, I've got some young fish I'd like to move. So you know what? We'll do that. We're going to move this young fish here. And you'll know I could potentially put it here, but I'm going to put it here. And what you're allowed to do is when you move a fish, you can move it down as many spaces as you want or many spaces left to right. So if it was here, the young fish was here, I could go all the way to here and that's fine. Or I could stop here, that's fine. But if this young fish was up here, I could go all the way down if I wanted to with that young fish or only to one spot. It's up to you, right? So that's cool. So that's how moving a fish will work. That's the rules for moving a fish, for instance. And remember, schools of fish cannot move into each other, which we explained. So anyways, so that's awesome. I got to activate that. Well, now the whale shark doesn't have anything for me. So then we're going to go down to this line here. And you'll notice, hey, we've got this icon again. That means I can move another fish. If this is the first time you went down this column, okay, that means guess what? We get to activate this ability again. But we'll put it here indicating that we've used it. And even if we couldn't use it, it still goes here, okay? Blocking us from doing it again if we decide to do this again in the same round. So this game encourages you to go down once each time at least per round of each of these columns, okay? So then guess what? That means I get to move another fish. So you know what? We're going to move this fish here. And guess what? Now we've got 3 young fish together. So that means we've got ourselves a school of fish. That is how that's going to work. Amazing, right? Beautiful. So that's how that green dive column is going to work. Okay? So now, let's explain. Let me zoom out a little bit. Let me explain this column next real quick. So if I was to go down this column here, I don't have any fish here, but let's just say I do. Let me grab one. Let's say I have this leafy sea dragon, for instance, here. Then I could place an egg on a card, on a fish I have. So that's what that icon is going to mean. This column lets me basically get eggs. So this column here let me hatch eggs, but this column here, this dive site column, is going to let me get more eggs and put them on fish, okay? And so then you'll go down, and if you have a fish, ooh, I do, that means I get another egg. Cool, cool. So I'll just put an egg down. Let's say it goes there. That's fine. It can go in the same spot as a school of fish. Then I'm going to go down to the next zone, but I do not have any fish in this zone at all. So that means I do not get this egg. Then we move down to the next spot. This is the first time I went down this column, so that means I get this egg as well. So hey, now I get another egg as well. I probably should have explained doing eggs before hatching, but oh well. But yeah, I got another egg, so that's nice. And then the last column here is basically letting you draw cards. So let's say I had that guy there, maybe. I had this guy here, okay. All right, so then I could send another guy down this column, this dive site, and I would see if I have a fish in this zone. I do, so I'd get to draw a card into my hand. Nice. And then we could go down to the next zone because there's no brown abilities here. I've got this manta ray in this zone. That means, hey, guess what? I get to draw another card. Nice. Then we go down to the next zone, the midnight zone, and we do have a fish here in the midnight zone. So that means, hey, guess what? I get to draw a card. So even if you don't have any fish in some of these columns yet, there's one fish in each column that's printed on the board. So you're still going to get to do something even if you don't have that many fish in the beginning of the game. All right. And then if this is the first time, I went down this column, this icon here, it has basically like a fish that's all bones, basically. This icon means that you get to take a card from your discard pile and put it into your hand. So this is the first time we went down the column for the round. Now I get to take one of these cards and put it into my hand. Ooh, I'll take this this lizard fish because I like lizards. Okay, cool. And that's how the columns work. That's how the dive sites work. That's how you play a fish. That's how everything's going to work in that regards as far as eggs, young, and schools of fish, right? So the only thing we really didn't explain is there are some fish that can only go in certain spots. We did explain that some fish can only go in certain zones. Some can go in all of them, you know, and they tell you on the side of the card which zone they could go into. But you'll notice on the right side of the card here, we've got this blue border. That means that this fish, even though it goes in the sunlight zone, it can't go in this column because it's not the same color. It can't go in this column because it's blue and not green, but it can go into this column because they're both blue, okay? So there's gonna be some fish that can only go in certain columns, okay? And hey, it's got that icon that lets you draw from your discard pile, so that's nice, right? There's another blue one, for instance. There's a purple one, for instance. Okay, so that's cool, right? And then there's going to be some fish that have game end abilities as well for the last round. So let me just find one that I want to explain. An easy one. This guy, that's right. So this leafy sea dragon, like I said, at the end of the game, I explained it already, but I'm just going to say it again. Some of these cards are going to have, you know, yellow abilities or game end abilities. So this one scores you 3 points if no tokens is on this fish at the end of the game. This one's going to score you 3 points if you have a school of fish on this card at the end of the game. Okay? And then let me explain one more fish ability. This is the cow nose ray. And you notice this icon here? It shows a fish and it shows a dive site. That means when you play the cow nose ray into any area, well, into the sunlight zone, it means that this icon means you can play a fish on the same turn that you play this into this dive site, which is the blue one, right? That means, in a sense, you can play more than one fish on the same turn. You could potentially play 2, maybe even 3, because you could keep activating this. But the thing is, you still have to pay the cost. So you're paying the cost to play this. So let's say we do that, and we're going to play it here. Well, the next fish I play, I have to pay the cost. So, for instance, I could play this abyssal swordfish, right? And I'd have to pay the cost. Ooh, here's a young fish. Pay that cost. But it has to go, but it doesn't have to go anywhere. It has to go in the twilight zone. So let's just say it goes there, right? But it also has a when played ability. It now says I can play a fish into this zone, into this bottom row here, basically. I still would have to pay the cost. Of course, I have to find a fish that, you know, has the zone it can go into, but this one would be impossible because it has to consume a fish, and there's currently no fish for it to consume. Here we go. Here's one. Oh, this abyssal angler fish could go into this spot. So, for instance, I could place that fish right there, and by paying the cost of discarding a card and then discarding an egg, for instance. And there we go. We have the abyssal anglerfish here. So that's basically everything you need to know in order to play the game. Like I said, there's going to be some abilities I didn't explain, but for the most part, I think you guys pretty much should understand how to play this game thanks to my video. I apologize if my voice is not 100% better. I was tired of waiting. And all right, so now I'll tell you guys what I think about the game. Okay, so first, let me start with the fact that Finspan has my 2 favorite animals in the game, the leafy sea dragon and the manta ray. Well, at least my favorites that are ocean-dwelling animals anyways. My 2 favorite ocean dwellers are in this game. Love it. Love it indeed. So let me first talk about some of the similarities to Wingspan and Finspan, as the reason why, as some of the similarities to Wingspan that Finspan has, I really like. So in Wingspan, you have 3 different rows that you're going down. One that lets you collect food, one that lets you collect eggs, and one that lets you draw cards. Well, in Finspan, there's a column that lets you draw cards. There's also a column that lets you collect eggs. But then the third column is different because food is different in this game, as there is not really food resources, because the fish themselves are potentially the food that you will need to pay in order to play fish, which is different because Wingspan, you collect food, you pay food, potentially eggs to play birds, right? So that's the thing. So the third column is actually hatching eggs, which is different because Wingspan, you don't hatch eggs in Wingspan, but you do in Finspan. And then you can move fish around, because that dynamic of moving fish around can allow you to basically move young fish into the same spot. And when 3 young fish meet, they become a school of fish. Thematically, I love it. Mechanically, I love it. Awesome job with that. And you get more victory points for the school of fish than you do the young fish and the eggs. So it's just worth doing. So the fact that you can hatch your, eggs into fish and then move said fish around could potentially mean you get that school of fish, which is a nice dynamic. And it's kind of nice just having that column there, so you can just kind of do all that and potentially get a school of fish that way. Now, of course, you can get school of fish other ways too, by playing certain fish that have abilities and things, right? But the one thing I like about the way it is to play a fish is some of the payments that you do will cause you to discard cards in order to play said fish. It's very easy to play fish because there's not like a limitation. In Wingspan, there was a limitation. You'd have to, at a certain point, you'd have to have eggs to discard in order to play the bird, and you also had to have a certain amount of food, and sometimes you'd have to have a select amount of food in order to play said bird. So it was more limited to when you could play a bird. In the first part of the game, you might be able to play one bird, but then you'd have to spend a couple of turns collecting food to play the next one. But in Finspan, you could easily play a couple of fish, potentially, before you have to start gathering more cards, resources, and things, and fish and eggs, obviously, to play said fish, because it's not just discarding cards, that you need for payment. Sometimes you have to discard eggs and young fish and a school of fish, and sometimes consume a smaller fish in order to play said fish into your player board, your ocean. So I love that. But what's really cool is, while that potentially could be a dilemma, if you think about it, that could potentially be a dilemma that you have to discard cards in order to play another fish, because those cards you're discarding could also be fish that you want to play, in a sense, right? But what's cool is you're discarding into a personal supply pile. Your personal discard pile, sorry. And so that means it's your discard pile. No other player can take that discard pile from you unless you run out of cards towards the end of the game and you need to shuffle everything together. That hasn't happened to me yet, but I haven't played a 5-player game, so I wouldn't know for sure if that would ever happen until that happens. So I experienced that anyways. But still, you've got your own discard pile, and then there is ways of getting those discarded cards back. When you decide to go down the column to get more cards, right, more fish, one of the last things you can do, if you haven't been there yet, that round, is you can take one of your cards from your discard pile and put it back into your play area, say you have it again. So you could potentially play it again later. And there's other ways of getting those discarded cards back. There's abilities and things like that. When activated, when played, abilities that could potentially get you more of your cards that you discarded back. So you could always potentially play everything you want that you get, is what I'm saying, which I love a lot. I love that aspect so much because and there's another reason why that's the case, because in Wingspan, you can only play like 5 birds into the forest, 5 birds in the wetlands, only 15 birds max, and that's it. Very tight knit, and even if you potentially could play 15 birds, most likely you would not have the resources to play 15 birds. And you certainly couldn't play every single bird that you like and see. You can play some of them, maybe most of them, but you can never play all of them. And I feel like in Finspan, I could play pretty much every single fish that I draw into my hand, basically. I could potentially play them all, potentially. Because not only, like I said, is it easy to play fish because, you know, a lot of the costs are something that you don't have to obtain again, you know, especially in the beginning of the game, because you start with an egg, 2 eggs actually, right? And 1 young fish. Potentially, there's already fish printed on the board. And so even if in the beginning of the game you had a fish that could only be played unless you consumed a fish, because the fish that are printed on the board are so small, well, that's, you know, they're tiny, so pretty much any fish you have in your hand could just consume those fish that are printed on the board. It's almost, in a sense, it makes you think, this is almost a free cost in a sense, because those fish are so small. And they don't have any abilities, those fish, and they don't provide any victory points, those fish. So it's like, potentially, if you get a fish that says, hey, all you have to do is consume a smaller fish to play this fish into your ocean, it's like playing it for free. It's amazing. Now, the reason why I say it also isn't as tight-knit as Wingspan is because there's more space. I think you could technically get 18 fish into your ocean, right? And because every single fish in this game can consume a fish, meaning you just play it on top of a fish you've already played, and then that fish becomes a tucked card for 1 extra victory point. While sometimes you might be thinking, I don't want to do that because I'm going to lose victory points. Well, some of those fish that you play have awesome abilities, but they only provide you a victory point or 2. So it's like you're not losing much if you play a bigger fish that provides more victory points on top of it. Especially if the fish that you're playing, you didn't want to play in the beginning of the game because you wouldn't have really gotten, you know, more out of it, you know? Like the great white shark, I wouldn't play that in the beginning of the game because you're probably not going to have very many predatory fish in the beginning of the game to really make that worth your while for playing it into your ocean. But at the end of the game, definitely, potentially, if you've played a lot of predatory fish, of course. And that could be said for several of the fish in this game that have extraordinary abilities like that. Anyways, like I said, it's not the tight knit because, like I said, you can put the fish on top of other fish. So in a sense, there is no limitations. The sunlight zone could be full of fish, completely full. But as long as the fish you want to play, you know, is bigger than at least one of the fish in that sunlight zone, you could still play it, you know? So that's the thing, even though there's fish that can only go in certain spots, and those certain spots, like the twilight zone in the middle, there's only 3 spots, right? And they can fill up fast, potentially. But that doesn't mean that nothing else could go there ever again once you place fish there, because as long as your fish that you want to play is bigger, it can go there. So it's like, so there's no dilemma of this tightness that Wingspan had. Okay, I love Wingspan, but like Wingspan was very tight knit. You know, you might have more than 5 birds you want to play into your forest, but they all can only go in the forest, and so you have this dilemma: which one do I want to play? Which one's going to score me the most points? Which one's the coolest? You know, this game, I don't have that problem. I don't have that issue, and I love that. I love not having that dilemma, and I can just picture my friends playing this game and being like, oh wait, I could play this later. I could just discard it now to play this other fish, and then I could get it back and play it, and then play it later. You don't have to worry about that dilemma. You know, I love that. I love it. You can play every fish, pretty much every fish you want that you can potentially play. You can play almost all of them that you find, that you draw, you know, that you pick up, you put it into your hand. I love that. Absolutely love that. That's one of the favorite things about this game I like, is just not having to worry about that dilemma. So that's really cool about Finspan. So anyways, so that's cool. But then thematically, like I said, when you put 3 fish together and they become a school of fish, and those can score you a lot of points, thematically, I love that. Thematically, mechanically, I love that. I think that's a cool aspect of the game. You know, and you still get points for each egg you have that you didn't hatch, you know. And even if you weren't able to get all your gun together and to form a school, you still get victory points for the young little fish that, you know, are here or there, you know. I haven't had an issue where the school of fish is in the way, preventing me from, you know, getting another school of fish, if, in a sense, you know, because I've been pretty good about planning it out ahead of time. So I haven't had that as an issue. But yes, you could potentially move a school of fish. If it's going to be in the way for whatever reason, you can move it out of the way with the move a fish ability. That's cool. As an option, that's a nice thing to have. Very, for sure, awesome. Even if I haven't had you know, needed to use that ability for that reason, it's still nice to have that option. Okay, so another thing I like is about Finspan is it has a lot of interaction. When you go down a column and you are going to activate some of your abilities that you're going down to activate, you know, down the column to activate certain abilities, which Wingspan had, just going down the row, right? Activating brown abilities, when activated abilities, you know. In this game, some of them, when you go down them, obviously, are going to allow you to, you know, get a card or do a certain thing based on what the other player is doing. You know, Wingspan had that too, but Wingspan had it where it was like, if you wanted to skip an ability, you could skip it, and then that means if it was one of those abilities that said, hey, everyone gets to draw a card, you decide not to do it, in Wingspan, you could skip it and nobody gets anything. But in Finspan, that's not the case. You aren't personally allowed to skip using an ability when you go down the column. But your friends, your opponents, they can still make use of that ability if it's for all players. So it's like, oh, it's not useful to me, but it could still be useful to your opponents. Now, for sure, you might not be thinking, oh, that's, you know, man, but I can't use that ability right now, or it's not going to work for what I want to do in the next turn. But your opponents can still take advantage of it. So there is that slight dilemma, you know, and personally, I think, well, maybe I wish that wasn't the case, like with Wingspan. But if I'm not the one with that ability, I definitely want that ability to still have that choice. So there's a little bit more interaction, I think, with Finspan in that regards. Just that dilemma, you know, of, oh, I can't make use of this ability, but my opponents could potentially still do, so I'm potentially helping out my opponents. Oh well. Moving a fish, for instance, might not help me right now because I don't have any fish out. But my opponents, they could have 2 fish together, and then they could just have 1 fish that's, you know, somewhere in the column or row of those 2 fish, and they can make use of your all players ability and take advantage of it and get a school of fish. You know, that's amazing that you can do that on your opponent's turns. So a little bit more interaction potentially on your opponent's turns than potentially, you know, not the case with Wingspan, as you could just skip the ability if it's not going to work for you. Another thing one thing that Finspan does not have, which I actually like, is Wingspan had pink abilities, which are called once in between turns. And there's so few of them. But those abilities are so annoying sometimes. In a 2-player game especially, you play that bird, and maybe once or twice the whole game you get to activate, once in between turns. I hated that. In a 5-player game of Wingspan, yeah, that's great. The pink abilities are awesome because you can only activate them once between turns, and then sometimes but you could potentially activate it a few times if it wasn't for the once in between turns. So that was always a dilemma with Wingspan. And in Finspan, there are no pink abilities. There are no once in between turns. So there might be a little less interaction, actually, now I think about it, because it doesn't have that. but I found that annoying in Wingspan. And there wasn't that many birds that had the pink abilities, the ones in between turns. So it happened very infrequently. And in this game, they just don't have it. And I like that about Finspan, that Finspan does not have that annoying bird ability that Wingspan had. So that's another thing. And so I really like how Finspan is mechanically and thematically, because it just makes sense. You know, there's always a bigger fish, consume a smaller fish. I love that. And thematically and mechanically, right? The school of fish, you know, and the three young fish, you know, come together, they form a school. I like that thematically and mechanically. I love that. There's just so many things I like about this game. But there is a couple of maybe nitpicks of Finspan. So first of all, I like the rule book for the most part. It's pretty precise, pretty easy to understand. There's not as many rules as there is in Wingspan. It seems like the Wingspan rulebook is definitely bigger and thicker, right? So less to read in Finspan, less rules. I think it's definitely easier to teach and understand than Wingspan is. That's another thing I like about this game. It's easier than Wingspan. If there's friends that I still haven't taught Wingspan to, because there is, I'm more inclined to teach them Finspan first. I do, of course, miss the rolling of the dice that Wingspan had into the tray to collect food resources. I do miss that. I like that little dice tower, even though many people do not like that dice tower because it can be hard to put the dice into that little thing. But I like it. So I miss that in Finspan's. But that's, you know, like that's a small thing, minor thing that I miss in this game. I don't miss the fact that that you're, in a sense, collecting too many eggs. That was kind of the problem with Wingspan, is it seemed like you could get a lot of victory points just by collecting eggs. And so even though they fixed that a little bit with the expansions, if you just play Wingspan as the base game, it's basically just get as many eggs as you can and you win. And so it's not very strategic in that sense. And in Finspan, that's not the case, because if you want to score the most victory points, you're going to want to play those really good fish, like the great white shark, right? At a critical, towards the end of the game, or the whale shark for that matter, potentially. And you want to get that school of fish out. And so it's centered around those two things. And of course, you can get a lot of victory points with the achievement board too, just like technically with Wingspan, except they call it goals for the round instead of achievement board. But I really, really like that for Finspan. I really like that. Another nitpick on the rulebook, though, is while it's easy and precise to understand, there are some aspects that I found I was having difficulty understanding, and it took 3 games to fully grasp. The first couple of games, I made so many mistakes. The first game, I made so many mistakes. The second game, I still made some mistakes. So one of the things is some of these fish, they have either a purple, a green, or a blue line on the side of the card. And the reason why that's the problem is it's on the right side of the card. When you are playing a fish, the payment is on the left side, right? But I feel like that line should also be on the left side, because I'm mostly looking at the left side, and sometimes I forgot that the line was on the right side with a different color, and it could only go in certain columns. And there were times I was like, I played the blue, halfway through the game, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I played this fish in the purple zone, but it has a blue border on the right. What am I doing? So I found that harder to understand, making that mistake. And because there's not that many fish that have that, there's a lot, but it's not every fish, right? And that's the difference between Wingspan. Is Wingspan, it has where it can go, where the payment is, basically. And so and they all have it. Some can go in all three of the different, biomes or environments, right? But regardless, they tell you right there and there, and they each have a place that they go, right? And with Finspan, many of the fish can go anywhere, well, except for certain zones, and we'll get to that. But those lines, not all of the fish have it. And so sometimes it's easy to forget, wait a minute, this can't go in this column. You know? And because it's on the right side, like I said, it was problematic for me, I found. So that was kind of a bummer for me. Hold on, sorry. My voice isn't 100% better. But on the left side at least, if it goes in a certain zone, it tells you. And that's kind of basically the same aspect of Wingspan, right? That each zone is basically like one of the three habitats of Wingspan: the sunlight zone, the midnight zone, and the twilight zone in the middle, right? And they tell you on the left side of the card what zones they can go in. And I didn't have an issue with that at all. I loved that. That worked because it was on the left side of the card. But there is one other thing that I think will be an issue. It looks like some of the fish can only go at the very top row, and some fish could potentially only go in the bottom row. I forget what the estuary, that's right. The estuary is at top, and I guess the bottom depth level or something for the midnight zone. And those icons, I think, are on certain select fish. And I think those fish, I can't remember for sure. I'd have to ask again if those fish have to go in those rows. I think they do. And if they do, that's problematic because that's going to be hard to remember. I realized that could be an issue. That potentially could be an issue for some people. That, wait a minute, this can only go in the estuary. So, and because it's on so few fish, and most of them do not have that, if you get that fish, it's going to be easy to forget. If you get one of those fish that have to go into the estuary. So I found that problematic. I think unless I'm wrong and it can go anywhere and but I would think that's not the case. I would think if it has that icon on it, it has to go, there. So I found that problematic, but I would still give this game like a 9.5. I really love Finspan. Those couple of nitpicks, those couple of issues with, the colors on the wrong side of the card, because I feel like they should be on the left side of the card, and the potential possibility of a fish that has to go into an estuary or the very bottom depth level of a card. I found that obviously problematic, and so that just drops it down half a point for me. Otherwise, it would have been a 10 if those, mechanical issues weren't an issue. And it would have been nice if there were some more explanations on certain abilities on cards. There's a handy player aid, which tells you how all of the icons work and what they do based on what side of the card they are on. They basically, tell you what they do. But I found another thing a little problematic was sometimes those abilities I got wrong on the first try because there wasn't examples of abilities. You know what I mean? There wasn't like fish in the rule book that said, hey, here's some examples of some fish that have these abilities. This is how they work. They didn't really have that. And that would have been nice if they devoted an extra page or two to explain some of the unique abilities in the game that you could potentially come across that are on potentially more than one fish, That would have been nice. Like I said, this is a small thing still. And while it took a couple of games to really understand, I think once you get past that, I think it's not going to be a super big issue once you've learned the game. Once you've played it a couple of times, I don't think that would be as big of an issue. But it is potentially an issue. It definitely, cause some problems, especially if you're new to gaming. Now, I will say this. If you have Wingspan, but you don't have Finspan, I would still suggest this game. You get this game because, like I said, for the most part, this game is easier than Wingspan. And if you're new to gaming and you don't have either or, I would choose Finspan first because this game is easier to understand, like I said, than Wingspan. Now, if you're an adept player, maybe not this game. If you have a Wingspan already and potentially Wormspan, right, you might not necessarily have to have this game because while it has a lot of things in it that are pretty unique, there's still a lot of, a lot of similarities to the other two. Well, Wingspan for sure. I've never played Wormspan, so I couldn't say, what similarities it has to that game. But you probably wouldn't have to have all three of these potentially. But on that note, if you're an animal lover like I am, because I'm an animal lover, I volunteer at a zoo, I love animals, I love fish, I love all animals, except for tarantulas. Can't stand those things. I love all animals besides that, though. And so, if you're an animal lover like me, I think you should get this game. If you're an animal lover. Especially if you like fish, right? I just love this game. So, thank you guys for watching my how to play video, part segment of this video. And thank you guys for listening to what I had to say about Finspan here. And like I said, I'm giving Finspan a 9.5. Just a few things that could potentially be improved upon to make it a 10 for me. Just a few things, minor things, but still 9.5 out of 10 is spectacular. Awesome, super fantastic game. And man, I love this game, Finspan. Can't wait to teach this to my friends as soon as I see them. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe if you guys liked this video.